Hello there, friends and followers, and welcome to this performance test video for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 and X-Plane 11. In this video, we are going to be conducting several tests to see how both Microsoft Flight Simulator and X-Plane 11 harness the power of the latest available hardware. For the purposes of this video, today we are going to be conducting a total of 4 tests, 2 tests in each simulator, one in a GA aircraft and another in a jetliner. This PC build is powered by an Intel i9-10900K processor overclocked to 5.1 GHz. This processor contains 10 physical and 10 logical cores for a total of 20. It is also equipped with an ASUS Fan ROG 360 liquid cooler, an MSI motherboard. MPG Z490 Gaming Edge Wi-Fi powers this PC. The available RAM is 128 GB of DDR4 Kingston Predator. There are 2 M.2 SSDs, each 1 TB in size. Both Microsoft Flight Simulator and X-Plane 11 are installed on the 1 TB SSD. Additional storage of 4 TB is also available in this PC build. The graphic card that powers this PC is the ZOTAC VGA 24GB RTX 3090. The power is supplied to this PC via a ThermalTake power supply 1200 watts, and it is enclosed in a Corsair case model 570K. Let us begin our first test in Microsoft Flight Simulator. We are currently situated at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport at runway 16 left. We have been cleared for takeoff. We're currently getting 26 FPS. Let's go ahead and take a look at the settings before we begin testing. As you can see here, we have the full screen display mode, 4K display 3440 by 1440, VSync is turned off, and we have render scaling set at 200, TAA for the anti-aliasing, 200 for terrain level detail, and everything else is set to ultra or the maximum available value. Bloom is something I turn off as a matter of personal preference. Alright, as you can see now, we have everything set at max. We are getting about 25 or 26 frames. As we move the mouse, you can see that the display is a little bit jittery. Alright, we are going to make a small correction to our settings, and then we're going to attempt once again to look at the performance. Before we begin tweaking the settings, let's take a look at the performance of the PC as it stands now. As you can see here, the CPU utilization is about 24%. We are clocking about 5 GHz at the moment. We can see that all the cores are being worked. However, we can see that this core here specifically and this one are probably doing most of the work. If we look at the memory, we can see that in use is about 20.5, available is 107, and if we look at the GPU, we can see that about 11.8 of the 24 GB has been committed for this specific scene. GPU temperature is normal, as well as the CPU. I think everything is looking good there, and we are getting about 25 frames. All right, let's go ahead and change the settings just a bit. We are going to head over here, and we are going to reduce the render scaling to about 130. And we are going to apply, and we're going to go back and resume. And as you can see now, we are getting about 34, 36 frames, so significant improvement when we reduce the render scaling. So this is something really that eats up a lot of your frames. And we're going to take a look at the clouds in a minute, but as you can see now, the jitters are gone. The display is very smooth and everything looks absolutely gorgeous. As you can see here in the external view, again, we're getting about 37, 36 frames as we pan around the aircraft in all directions. It's pretty smooth. I absolutely adore this 4K display. It really does change the entire experience when you have a 4K display. And this one is a 34-inch curved Dell Alienware. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We are going to release the parking brake, and we're going to take off, and we're going to perform some more tests. So let's go ahead and do that. Parking brake is released, and we are good to go. So let's give it full power. Here we go. And we are maintaining about 35 frames right now, steady. And as you can see, everything's pretty smooth. And remember, I am recording this video at 4K, so it is a little different than what I'm used to. All right, let's rotate. Here we go. And we're still maintaining a reasonable frame rate. So in the 30s, still in the lower 30s now, as we depart Seattle, Washington, and climb. As you can see now, there are a lot of trees and buildings in the scene and the area, and so but nonetheless, you know, as we pan around the cockpit, everything is pretty smooth, everything looks pretty good. And if we switch to external view, as you can see here, everything is looking absolutely gorgeous. There we go. Here we can see far in the distance, everything looks good. The image looks sharp. There are no stuttering whatsoever. And if you do see any stutters, it's probably from the recording, not from the simulator, because it is absolutely smooth as silk. There we go. We can see the scene here. Spectacular, really. Very, very nice. The performance is very reasonable, even with you know, the settings being set at maximum. Just be mindful of the render scaling, and of course we can gain a little more FPS if we reduce the render scaling to 100, which is normally the default setting. But as you can see here from the window, everything's looking really, really good. We're going to just make a turn here. You can see everything is quite sharp. You can see the movement of the cars here in the street. Just really a very immersive experience. We are going to go ahead and introduce some clouds into the scene. So let's say scattered clouds, and let's watch what happens to the FPS. As you can see, the FPS is actually unaffected by the introduction of clouds, and the scene still looks pretty good, pretty sharp, very smooth. There we go, external view again, and as you can see, everything is looking pretty good. So as you can see, with this PC specifications, we are able to obtain about 37, or let's say lower 30s, with everything being maxed out in the Cessna 172. What we are going to do now is we're going to perform the same test, but this time we are going to be loading the Boeing 787. We have now loaded the Boeing 787 with exactly the same settings at Seattle Tacoma International, runway 16 left. As you can see, with exactly the same settings, we are getting about 25 FPS. As we pan around the cockpit here, we can see there's a little bit of a jitter, and we probably need to tone down our settings a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the settings, and I'm going to reduce the render scaling back to 100 and see if that helps. We're going to apply and save, and we're going to go back and resume. And now we can see that the FPS is unaffected. So there is something else that we need to do in order to gain a little more FPS. So let's head back over to the settings menu. We're going to put this back on 130, but we are going to reduce the texture super sampling to 6x6. We're going to apply and save, and we're going to head back to the sim and see if that helps. Now, it's very important when you test the settings, the effect of the settings, that you do them by one to see which one has made the difference. As you can see now, there is still no difference in the FPS. So the trick here is to manipulate the glass cockpit refresh rate. So let's turn this back on to 8x8, but let's go here and change the glass cockpit refresh rate to low. And we're going to apply and save, and we're going to go back and resume. Now you can see that we have gained a little bit of FPS, so we're getting now in the upper 20s, so 28, 29, something like that. We can see that as we pan around, the jitters are less, but still not exactly where I want it to be. So we're going to head back over to the general settings here, and we are going to reduce both the render scaling to 100, and we're going to also reduce the texture super sampling to 6x6. We're going to apply and save, and now we're going to go back to the sim and see what happens. Now we're getting about 27, 20, so really no change as we change these settings. So we're just going to go ahead and take off and see how the FPS is affected. So remember, folks, this is a monster of a PC in terms of the specifications, and still at these settings with this aircraft and this particular scene, we are getting FPS in the upper 20s. So let's release the parking brake and let's give it full power. Now, as we roll down the runway, we can see there's again a little bit of jitters there. We are about at 26 frames now. Still flyable in my view, but I think there's now we're down to about 25. In my view, for these for the PC specs, I expected a lot better in terms of performance. All right, so here we go. We're going to take off, and as you can see, our positive rate gear is going up. And as we depart Seattle, we can see that the FPS is kind of declining now, fluctuating really, lower 20s, upper 20s. Let's switch to external view, and from the external view we're getting decent frames, about 36 frames, something very kind of indigenous of FSX. The external view you get better frames than the internal view, but as you can see, the scene isn't very smooth. There are some jitters there, here and there, so it might help to reduce some of the other settings in order to enjoy flying experience in an area that is as heavily involved as Seattle in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now, we did not get any performance degradation when we introduced clouds. Now we're getting something in the 30s, so let's go ahead and see if we're going to get anything in terms of, we're going to go to scattered clouds, and again there is really no change in the FPS. It's reasonable in terms of the performance, still flyable. In my view, you can still enjoy it at 29 FPS. This is the external view, spectacular really view of Seattle and all the clouds here in the vicinity. And by the way, this is probably the heaviest aircraft on frames in terms of the jetliners, along with the 747 is kind of the same, but I find the 787 to be the one that taxes the resources the most. Now we're getting about 39, 38, and if we switch to the interior, we're back to the upper 80s. A nice scene, nonetheless. I think it's somehow, it really fluctuates. So I think definitely the settings need a little bit of tweaking. All right, so what we're going to do now, we are going to go ahead and take a look at X-Plane 11, and we're going to perform the same test in both the Cessna 172 and probably the Tolis A321. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the world of X-Plane 11. We are at exactly the same location, Seattle, Tacoma, and at runway 16 left, we're getting 27 frames with maximum settings. Let's take a look here at settings real quick. As you can see, everything is maxed out, with exception of draw parked aircraft is unticked because I have Traffic Global running by Just Flight. Also, for the purposes of this test, I have installed Orbex True Earth. And I was actually surprised to see that the performance is exactly the same with Orbex True Earth or without it. So with the default X-Plane textures, there was no difference in FPS. So obviously, if you pan around the 3D cockpit, you can see there's a little bit of a jitter. So let's see if we can get this number to work for us. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to reduce the visual effects here, the HDR to, you know what? Let's reduce this one, the anti-aliasing to 4 SSAA FXAA, and we're going to say done. And we're going to take a note of the FPS now. And as you can see, not really that much of a difference in terms of the FPS change. So I'm going to head back over here and I'm going to put this back on 8. I'm going to reduce the HDR and I'm going to say done. And let's see now. Again, really no change in performance whatsoever. So, well, kind of. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run everything at maximum settings and we're going to take off and then we're going to see if we can tweak the settings a little bit to gain a little more performance. But I do want to assess how the sim actually behaves with maximum settings. So parking brake is released and let's give it full power. There we go, parking brake. Parking brake hasn't been released. Now it is released and ooh, we are at full power. Now, again, it is enjoyable, still flyable, not fully enjoyable in my view, but again, I would expect better FPS considering the compute power. Nonetheless, it's still pretty good. I think it is flyable, usable, not very enjoyable in my view. There's a little bit of jitters here and there, and as we pan around the camera, you can really see that there is some jittering going on there. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to head back to the settings and we're going to change this here and we're going to change the anti-aliasing here and we're going to say done. And let's see what happens now in terms of FPS. Again, there's no change in FPS. And the reason being is the water body over there. So that's the reflections there, as you can see. And if we actually start turning, we might get better FPS. But as you can see, the overall experience is not bad. Now we're getting something in the lower 30s. The sim actually runs pretty smooth. So yeah, if we look now, we're getting better FPS now, 36. So now the sim actually looks pretty good. And it still performs very good as well, but nonetheless not where I would expect it to be. So even with the RTX 3090 and a processor with 20 cores working all together at 5.1 gigahertz, we're still not getting, you know, a performance that we'd expect for this much of compute power. There is still some shimmering, as you can see here, but again, this is a 4K display, so it does require a little bit more. But this graphic card, in my view, the 3090 isn't worth buying if you are not doing some kind of graphics work that requires 8K display and things like that. If you want to buy the RTX 3090 just for Microsoft Flight Simulator and X-Plane 11, in my view, it is not worth the investment. That is my own personal view. This is external view. As you can see, things look pretty good. And the sim is pretty smooth now. I mean, even at, we are at 37, 38 frames. Things look pretty good from the outside. I tell you, the reflections in X-Plane 11 look a little bit dated in my view, especially that we have, Microsoft Flight Simulator to compare it to. But I still enjoy X-Plane 11. The fidelity of the aircraft in X-Plane 11 is still a lot better than MSFS 2020. All right, so let's take a look at the here. As you can see, this core is being utilized almost exclusively. We're still clocking 5 gigahertz. CPU utilization is definitely less, so it was about 23 in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and in X-Plane it was about 16. Temps in terms of the GPU and the utilization is pretty much the same. It was slightly higher for Microsoft Flight Simulator, but not really that much of a difference. You can see that we are using a lot more GPU memory here, 16.6 as opposed to some 11-ish in Microsoft Flight Simulator. All right, let's go ahead and load up the TOLUS A321 and perform the next test. Welcome back, folks. We are now in the TOLUS A321 with the Neo mod, and we are averaging 37 FPS in the external view. And as you can see, as we pan around the aircraft, everything is smooth as butter. But if we head to the 3D cockpit, as you can see now, we get a little bit of jitters as we pan around, and we're getting about 26 frames. Not very different from the Cessna, but, still reasonable in my view. Not enjoyable, not exactly where I expected it to be. But again, we can take a look at the... by the way, this is the Seattle-Tacoma is the only area where I suffered this much of performance degradation, but in other areas, even in Los Angeles and New Orleans, and where the scenery is quite involved, I was averaging about 45 frames with maximum settings. So actually, what you would notice is if we turn off reflections, you'll see that this is going to have a major impact on performance. As you can see now, 36 frames. So that's 10 FPS in total. Now everything is smooth. So we are going to bring this back though, and we are going to take off with that setting. Okay, so as you can see, 10 FPS taxed when you enable reflections at the maximum settings. In my view, by the way, you can turn off reflections, in the interest of other settings. So I would favor other settings to max out other settings, and just, leave the reflections on off or low or something like that. All right, so let's go ahead and release the parking brake, and we are going to take off. We are on runway 16 left, and let's go ahead and give it full power. Now, we are getting 26 frames, but I think this is still, reasonably smooth. There are definitely some jitters there, but reasonably smooth in terms of, the overall experience. But again, very disappointing performance, given, the power available in this build. Again, as you can see here, you can see all the jitters there, and you can see that the FPS is kind of low. We are getting more FPS now, about 30 frames, 33 frames, something like that. Now you can see that the scene is pretty reasonable, and you can see now the FPS is increasing as we move away from the airport vicinity here at Seattle. A very nice scene out of the aircraft window. Let's switch to external view. RC, okay, let's track the landing here. Again, it looks pretty good, pretty smooth. Even at 23 frames, still looks pretty good in my view. A bit jittery, but still enjoyable. I mean, still flyable. You can still fly it. And there's a lot of fluctuation here. You can see the airport area. when the airport area is in the scene, you can see the degradation in performance. If I pan the camera away from the airport scene, we can see that we get more FPS. And as we switch the view towards the mountain area, so yeah, in terms of the overall performance, disappointing, but you can still actually run the simulator at full settings and enjoy the experience. Actually, one thing we'll do is we are going to set this all the way to max, and let's see what effect it has on FPS now. And again, as you can see, there's no effect on the FPS. 26 is still the same. So we know the bottleneck now is the reflection setting, as you can see here. So if I go back and change the reflection details to 0 and say apply, and we can see now that we're getting better frame rates automatically without the reflections. So steady here at the 32 mark, and everything is pretty smooth. By the way, anything above 30 is going to be really good. So it's really going to provide you with a very smooth experience. Well, folks, this is pretty much what I wanted to share with you in this video. If you have any questions, please do post them in the comment section below. I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. I do want to thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as I did making it for you. Until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you all very soon. Thanks for watching.